stormwater, we have raw water, we have treated water, we have water rates that we want to follow up review on. This is a follow-up from last retreat, and Brenda Clifford going to walk you through this presentation to talk about what kind of options we have.
I've got 19
got
minutes.
19
What happened to the battery?
I hope that battery was the battery at 19.
The battery on
Is
it.
it
Oh, the
plugged
battery.
in?
A little message popped up.
Make sure it's not plugged in, that's the problem.
Look at
Let's
it.
do that. I call all the time.
Okay, this is one of those complex ones, so we're going to
Buckle up.
say, yeah, buckle up.
All right, we're going to talk about water rates now. And in the rate structures, various options here. One important note to start out with first, I guess, is to say that our current rate structure, there's really not a financial reason right now to change. The existing rate structure is functioning, but there may be other reasons that you might want to change the current rate structure that we're under. And the obvious one is stimulating conservation of year-round. There's possible future state requirements coming down the way. There's been a few, there's been a task force, an advisory council that has been tasked with coming up with implementation for conservation strategies and getting us all on that road. And so there could possibly be some things coming down that we don't know about yet, and that would be a reason to take a look at our efforts. The Texas Water Development Board also recommended in a study in 2011 called a Region C water plan that all cities should reduce water. They came up with a calculation and measurement here of 140 gallons per capita per day. And currently the city of Lewisville is at 157 gallons per capita per day. And I've got a chart coming up about how we compare to our survey cities that we'll be looking at. And with conservation, there's the obvious reason, the philosophical reasons. As good stewards of our natural resources, we obviously live in a climate here in Texas that those natural resources aren't always being replenished all the time. So we may want to look at rates to be to further those efforts and take care of our environment. Some other objectives could be reducing our peak demand in the summer. As Carol mentioned, we have that demand subscription from the Dallas Water Utilities for 9 million gallons per day. That is the most we can get from them per day, or we go to a new level and we pay that forever. And as she pointed out, a 1 million gallon bump up would cost $202,000 to our budget forever, whether we use it or not. So we have that budget impact that we've got to think about, and a lot of times during the summer, that's where our attention is diverted to, with irrigation going on so heavily in the summer. Another objective could be equity. You know, right now our current rate structure, all customer classes are charged the same rate. We might want to look to see if one customer class, such as residential, are they subsidizing the commercial customers? Is demand being driven by one class or another? And are our rates setting comparable and equitable along those lines? It sometimes can be tricky when you're looking at changing your rate and adjusting it based on customer classes, because you don't know what their exact response is going to be. We can guess and we can estimate, but until we do it, we don't really know how that's going to work. And of course, with the objections, we always want to avoid any unintended consequences, basically risk in changing a rate structure. You know, you make too rapid of a change, too large of a change, you might have some financial impacts to our budget that we didn't count on, or any adverse impacts to one class or another that you may have not counted on. You know, we've got a history of very slow incremental rate increases along every year, and so we've got a habit of going slow, measuring what happens, and then moving on. So first, let's give you a good foundation of our current rate structure right now, the way we are set up today. We have 4 basic customer classes we track, We have a residential accounts, they're almost 18,000. We have commercial accounts, almost 3,000. We have our irrigation accounts, and these are just separate irrigation meters, almost 1,200. And then we have our industrial class, not very many in this class. And basically these are those customers out there that use water in their business. And so they're very small, but they are a customer class that we have. All pay for the water on the same rate structure. There's no tiers, no seasonal rates. There's this flat rate. They all pay that same rate. Now it's based on meter size, so obviously if you have a larger meter size, you're going to have a bigger base rate. But as far as volume charge, we're all paying the same volume rate, whether you're residential, commercial, irrigation, or industrial. The water bill, let's take a look at our current water bill. There's really two components, and Carol touched on this. We have a demand component and a volume. The demand is basically what we call also a base charge. It is the charge for the access to the water. It pays for those, it's intended to pay for the fixed costs of a water system by just providing you the water. An example of that would be your line cost. The city had costs attributed to getting a line to your house and the maintenance of that line, no matter how much water you're ever going to use. So we would usually charge this demand component based on your meter size. The bigger the meter, the more cost you have to pay. The volume is strictly a charge on the volume of water, very simple. It pays for that variable component of our water costs. So an example of that is the purchased water cost. The more volume we use, the more we have to pay for, the higher our cost. And this is usually charged on a per gallon basis. The city's current rates right now, again, those two components, we have a demand charge, and 2,000 gallons are within that demand charge, and it's based on meter size. As you see, we have anywhere from 3/4 of a meter all the way to the 10-inch meter. Most of our residential accounts have that 3/4 inch meter. Most of the irrigation is in that, has the 2-inch meter there. So you can see that it varies based on that meter size for the demand charge. The other component, that volume, is a flat volume charge per 1,000 gallons, $2.76. So we're going to take you through an average example here, just in case you want to quit your day job and come work for us in utility billing. The average Lewisville residential customer uses 6,000 gallons of water, and they also have a 3/4 inch meter. So again, look at those two components. We're going to charge them for that 3/4 inch meter base charge, or again called a demand charge, of $13.34. And the volume charge within that base charge, remember they've already paid for 2,000 gallons. So if they are using 6,000, we need to charge them for another 4,000. So you take that $2.76 times 4,000 divided by 1,000 gallons, and you get the $11.04. So for this residential customer, their total water billing would be $24.38. Total water billing.
Oh, water, that's on top of the base fees or anything?
No, yeah, just this is total water billing. Now there's a sewer, and there's maybe garbage,
Yeah,
there's sales tax.
Thinking the whole water bill, okay.
Yeah, no, just the water component here. Now, if you had a business that also has a 3/4 inch meter and using 6,000 gallons a month, their water bill would also be $24.38 under our current structure.
What did you just say? Would you repeat that?
If you're a business and you happen to have a 3/4 inch meter and using 6,000 gallons like this residential customer here, your water bill would also be $24.38. We charge the same volume rate, and of course a lot of our businesses do have larger meters. So like if you had that 2-inch meter that we talked about earlier, I think its base rate is $61.11. So your first component, instead of that $13, you would have a $61 charge there. You'd still be charged $11.04 for your volume if you're using 6,000 gallons.
Okay.
So it'd be a $72 bill. Yeah.
Sorry,
No, that's
this
okay.
is where I have a problem with this. Regardless of their meter size, they're still using the same amount of water.
Correct.
Okay, so sounds like you're alluding to charging more just because their meter's bigger?
Yeah, remember that's that fixed cost. It costs
Well, they're
more.
already charging for the meter, right? That's a different
That
payment
that
for
is the
meter.
demand, that's the variable, $13 here, or on a 2-inch meter, it's $61. It's recovering those fixed costs of those line costs
But a
that
2-inch meter,
don't
you're
change.
using a hell of a lot more than 4,000 gallons a month, or 6,000.
Right.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying, but she said if they were only using
Well, that's a hypothetical.
hypothetical, okay.
Right.
Well, either way, it's.
They wouldn't
price per
pay for
gallon,
more on the volume water.
Charging more per gallon.
Basically, what you're paying for, and that man charges the right to use more, just like our deal with the Dallas water. They charge us for 9 million gallons, we have the right to use 9 million gallons. We might not use 9 million gallons, but they're gonna charge us for it anyhow, because we could take it any day. I understand. Same time.
It goes for paying the capital, the plant, the line costs, all those fixed costs that are made so they can deliver that amount of water to you.
I understand, but we do charge more for the larger meter.
Right.
That's what
Anyway,
we're showing.
okay,
Yeah.
for the, okay.
Correct.
Just making
That
sure.
ability to pull more water if you want. So our current rate model that we use to set our rates, we've been using since the early 90s. And, you know, we update it every year for new data and new costs, and we've tweaked it along the way a little bit, but it's pretty much the same model. And our experience with that model has allowed the city to establish rates that will provide revenues necessary to cover our budgetary needs. It's been consistent and pretty reliable. The next chart you see, that 157 gallons per capita per day figure that we talked about earlier, we've shown you on a chart here with our other survey cities. And this is per the Texas Water Development Board 2010 Water Use Survey. And as you can see, we're in the middle, just slightly below the middle right there, but well within the range of other cities and where they're at on this statistic.
I'm not sure this is a fact, but I'm assuming that Grapevine is that high because of the large convention center and the hotel with the water park.
Well, and the population, they've got a small population, they only got like 35,000 people in the city.
But again, the gallons per day.
Right.
Capital
That's
are
what
extremely
I'm,
high for
that's what
some
I'm saying,
reason.
they've got the big convention center and stuff,
Yeah,
and
not
hotels
that
there,
many people.
but
Right.
very
The
low population.
denominators
Yeah,
for
they great with lunch,
Right.
very big
Yeah.
water park.
By the way,
Had to say denominator.
that would be an
One.
example of a very high, typically industrial class water user. Somebody that uses water in a water park would be considered just like a bottler or somebody like that, would be considered an industrial customer. And so rate changes associated with their water use can dramatically affect their billings.
So in Lewisville, who's using the water? We took our annual consumption that we have, and with those same customer classes that we've been looking at, residential is, as far as consumption goes, uses 42% of the water on an annual basis. Commercial, and these are, remember, the commercial meters and accounts only, not the irrigation. You do have some businesses that have a commercial, like apartments. They have a meter for all their tenants, you know, on personal use within their apartment. And then they have an irrigation meter for their irrigation, landscaping, those type of things. But commercial only is 35% of the usage. The irrigation, again, those that are metered, are 22% usage, and industrial 1%.
Those irrigation, are those commercial irrigation meters?
Yes,
Not
most of them
residential.
are. There's very few residential that
include
gets them.
It includes residential.
It does include the
Yes,
residential meters?
But
Okay.
there's not very many that are there.
Now, what you have to bear in mind on this is that irrigation number is just those metered irrigation. If you looked at the use, then that irrigation number would probably be a little bit higher, or maybe substantially higher, because a lot of that residential consumption is associated with irrigation during the summer.
Right.
Sure.
So you can't say that our demand is only 22% irrigation. It's going to be much higher than that, especially during the summer.
It's not capturing all the irrigation going on. So let's look at rate types. There are various ways, if you wanted to change the rate structure, there's various ways you could do so. One of the first rate types that is talked about a lot of times is called a tiered rate structure. And this is also known as the inclining block rate. It occurs year-round, and it would replace your existing flat rate structure. The rates would escalate as you approach higher volumes of water usage. And instead of the city's current $2.76, it would be various rates, depending on how many gallons you use. A typical residential example here we've got of a city that has a tiered rate structure is Plano. Their first 1,000 gallons is included in their base, their demand rate of $18.62. If you use between 1,001 and 5,000 gallons, then those gallons are going to cost you 43 cents per 1,000 gallons. On tier 2, the gallons, if you go over 5,001 to 20,000, it's going to cost you $2.21 per 1,000 gallons.
Whoa.
And tier 3, the last, any gallons over 20,001 or more is $4.42 per 1,000 gallons.
Okay, per 1,000.
Per 1,000, yes.
You just forgot that
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed that too later on this
That's a
afternoon.
hell of a incentive to stop.
Yeah. You'd rather go to the store and buy a gallon of water, I think.
You can do the rain dances.
So in this kind of structure, what happens, let's say you're a resident and you're using 22,000 gallons of water. You're gonna get that 1862 charge, and added to that, tier 1 for the next 4,000 gallons is gonna cost you 43 cents. The next 15,000 gallons, that between 5,000 and 20, is gonna be $2.21 per 1,000 gallons. And so we've taken care of that 15, the 4, and the 1 that came in the base, that's 20,000 gallons. So you've got another, if you're using 22,000 gallons, you got another 2,000 to take care of, so that you hit that tier 3, and 2,000 gallons is gonna cost you $4.42 per 1,000. So it all adds up together to get you your total bill.
You know, how did they implement that? Did they just all of a sudden throw it in there, or did they do it gradually, or do you know?
I don't know, we didn't talk about implementation to them. I don't know, yeah, I don't know how many years they've been tiered, probably a long time.
Well, one of the things I want you to note is what happens to a flat rate when you go to a tier. Obviously, for the higher users, the rate's going to go up. For the lower users, the rate typically goes down. So your mom and pop residential customers are now paying 43 cents instead of our rate, which is 2.76, for example, that flat rate. You would have a comparable decrease. So those low-end users are going to be dropping down on the volume rate, where the high-end users are building up.
And your revenue basically stays flat.
Basically, you're trying to meet a revenue requirement no matter what.
Mhm. Obviously, this kind of structure would discourage, unnecessary water use for those higher users. And you're reducing, since this is year-round, you're reducing your winter demand as well as your peak water demand in the summer. And the cost of water obviously increases with consumption. This is volume-driven. In this example, the base, the demand charge stays at 1862. It's only with the volume that your bills go up, is with how many gallons you're using. All survey cities, all of our survey cities, they have some form of tiered rate structure, except Grapevine and Mesquite and us right now. Another rate type that's pretty popular to do is seasonal rates. Now these rates only occur during the months of possible peak usage. Summer billing months for June through October. And the way that works for those billing months, June through October, you'd be billing one rate. And that's really, how we bill is in arrears after you have consumed the water. So it's really for consumption that's going on from May to September, which we all know are the hotter, the more watering goes on months. Rates change for those summer billings only. And instead of the city's current $2.76 per 1,000 gallons year-round, you'd have a higher rate for that time of the year. And it can be used in conjunction with a tiered rate structure, like we talked about in Plano. So an example here is at Carrollton. They have a tiered rate structure but it's also a seasonal rate structure. Their first 2,000 gallons are included in their base or their demand charge of $10.63. But the next tier from 2,000 to 10,000 gallons is charged at $2.66 per 1,000 gallons. The next one from 10,000 to 25 is at $3.58. And the last, anything over 25,000 gallons is $4.49 per 1,000 gallons. But this rate structure is only in effect through May through September. October through April, you're at the flat rate like we are. Now obviously this would discourage unnecessary water usage for those higher users only during the peak demand time, not so much during the winter, because there's no change in your rate in the winter. The cost per unit of water increases only during those summer months. And of our survey cities, Coppell, Carrollton, Denton, and Irving use a tiered seasonal rate structure. There is no survey city that uses a flat seasonal rate, meaning that you charge someone $2.76 during the winter, but for every gallon they use in the summer, you charge them $3 or $4. There's no survey city that's doing that currently. So another strategy for a rate type would be irrigation only rate. You know, the irrigation, it can be seasonal or year-round, and you just make that irrigation, those irrigation meters, higher than our standard rates. It would be applicable to only those accounts, and that would be the customer class that would be most apt to have that excessive usage, so you could just apply it to just those accounts. There is no survey city doing that, by the way, but that is an option. So some Lewisville stats to look at, some considerations for you just keep in mind. For our residential customers, over half use 0 to 6,000 gallons. They're already at that low usage already. That's about 9,800 accounts we have here. The commercial accounts, 40% of them use 0 to 30,000 gallons. Again, approximately 1,175 accounts are at that lower end. Now the irrigation accounts, though, and these again are those, it could be those apartment complexes with irrigation meters and businesses with irrigation meters. They consume, 52% of them consume 100,000 gallons or more on a monthly basis, about 600 accounts. So the biggest opportunity here for conservation in the summer, if you're looking at the summer months, is those peak, when that peak usage is occurring, is some of those irrigation accounts. It appears to be at least.
Wouldn't you though, if you're really trying to get after conservation, and wouldn't you have to be careful to make sure you don't charge your irrigation accounts more than what it would, I don't know how I'm gonna say this, than what it would save you, because if you've got a commercial account that's using he only has 1 meter. He's using that meter for his water in his business and his irrigation. Okay, so he's paying a lot more because he's getting charged for sewage on that water too, right? His rate is higher, his water bill rate is going to be higher because he's charged the same amount for sewage,
Well,
right?
it depends on, the sewer bill is set on a winter average.
Right, but still,
Commercial's 100%.
Oh, we're talking commercial. I thought not on
I'm talking about
the-
commercial. Right, but then you got an irrigation account, he's not paying that sewer charge, so of course we're not being spending it, but if you raise the bill too high on irrigation, they just switch over to the commercial, and then you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you? If you increase the irrigation account too much, people would stop using that and just go to their commercial account water.
They just shut the meter off and water from some other source.
Right, that's what I'm saying, you'd have to be careful.
Yeah, it,
Well,
well,
you see that
one
class.
of these situations too would be, that person, if he moves from an irrigation account to the sewer, he's gonna pay 100% of the sewer.
On the sewer, so he's getting a double rate anyway.
Right.
If he chose to.
Right, it still depends on how much you adjusted that rate to.
That'd be a disincentive to do that, sewer rate.
You wouldn't want to do that, you don't want to do that to commercial accounts, you wouldn't want to do that to our residential customers.
Most commercials have, could verify this, but most commercial accounts have a separate irrigation in their irrigating.
If they're irrigating, they're doing that. I mean, a lot of commercials don't have anything that they would irrigate, but the gas station on the corner may be on impervious surface, so they're not gonna pay the irrigation.
Right.
So they're not gonna be irrigating that. You're right. Apartment complex, they, you know, the drive up uphill means an awful lot to them, so they have quite a bit of irrigation.
They probably got more irrigation meters than they've got domestic meters feeding the complex.
What was the disincentive in the mayor's example from going from irrigation to commercial accounts?
You probably have to change your plumbing, one, because you got irrigation to make it run off of domestic or some type of a tap. You're also gonna be paying your sewer rate, which we're not really looking at, we're only looking at water right here. But you would have to pay 100% sewer as a commercial property. So your current sewer rate is another $3, that would be like taking this rate, increasing another $3 over our 276. So you're looking at probably $6, $7 that they're gonna be paying to do that.
Okay, thank you.
But there is a point, I guess, you could raise it so high that it could be beneficial.
And that's why, if you're trying to get them, you know, so, you know, if you're trying to get them to reduce consumption. Of course, I think that you can tell by the irrigation accounts whether residential or commercial, right?
Yes.
It don't make sense.
We could look at.
Because you wouldn't want to do that for residential. Okay. Since I'm residential.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Okay, you have
Thank you.
those, huh?
Don is passing around a list of, that Councilman Ferguson had mentioned about the top commercial irrigation and industrial. I knew it wasn't residential, I was trying to figure
Did you get a permit?
out. Accounts, just for your information. And you'll see on the first page, the commercial, most of it, you can see, most of our commercial biggest users are apartments. The next page, industrial, we have some there. Again, not as large of a list, but there are some that use a lot of water there. And then the irrigation, the last list there.
Brenda, if I might interrupt.
Yes, go ahead.
On the commercial, on the first page, you have number 9, which is digital Lewisville Conversion Center. That commercial account mainly are chillers and boilers that they use to heat and cool that complex with. So, and then if you look on the irrigation or the industrial, you have them there as well. So probably the industrial, I said that back, probably the industrial is the chillers and the boilers. Some, yeah.
They're all over.
Yeah, and then they have irrigation on top of that. So
Yeah.
one of those components is the industrial is based on the chillers and boilers because they use chemicals and they're based on the surcharge rate, et cetera, et cetera.
So some factors you need to keep in mind, I guess, that when you're looking at rate models and setting rates. One is the factor of elasticity, and which is a measurement of how changing the rate affects consumption. Now, obviously, we don't have data for just Lewisville. What's going to happen when you increase rates? What is it going to do to consumption? We don't have actual data for Lewisville because we've never done it. But the industry standard tells us that for every 10% increase in price, there is a 2% decrease in consumption over time. It doesn't mean the first year. You know, you could have, if a rate is a large increase that first year, you're going to have a little bit of a shock going on. People are going to really go down their consumption. But over time, then they ratchet up a little bit. So that is just the industry standard, that for the 10% increase in price, you're going to see a 2% consumption decrease. Similar to gas prices. We all kind of get shocked when it goes over those dollars, of $3 or $4 a gallon, but we kind of get, and we kind of used to it, and then we forget when it was $2 a gallon.
I don't think we get used to it, it's just that we feel like we have to drive, we have
Yeah.
to go to work, we have to do things.
Yeah.
And, you know, we got, it's like thumbs underneath the screw nails, they're pulling
But
it
you
out of
get
us.
used to it.
We're still gonna use the gas because we have to go. Not that we get used to it, it's just, trust me, every time I go put gas in the pump, I'm thinking of back when it was below $1, but
Yeah.
we have to, you know.
Well, the model that we ran, and Clifford's gonna go through several models, it has that elasticity within those rates and calculations, so it kind of takes that factor into consideration that you'll be seeing here pretty soon. Also, for industrial accounts, by their very nature, they use water in their operations, so they're not very good candidates for conservation. So most systems don't, they exclude them from a tiered or seasonal rate structure. Another factor is looking at your base users and your higher users, and I think one of you mentioned this kind of earlier, alluded to this. You know, if for those on the lower end of the usage, our residential and our commercial customers, they provide a stabilizing effect to our revenues. You know, there's not much they do, they can go down, not much further they go down, so those revenues are pretty much solid for us. But when you start raising rates to those higher users, it becomes a little more volatile. They can change their habits, they can cut back on watering. So it just makes sure, or if there's a hot or dry summer, or a wet summer, you see those fluctuations happen on those higher users. So by shifting those revenues via the rates to those higher end users, your whole revenue structure is just a little more unstable. And we just have to be able to react to it and realize that our revenues may not be as steady as we anticipated when we are changing around our rate structure like that. Because the consumption, again, we can make assumptions on what people are going to be doing out there, but until you actually do it, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen to the consumption.
Just keep Castle Hills around, we'll be all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, what we'll do now is we're going to look at 4 different scenarios that we put together. There's a lot of variables that go into this, so there's not just 4 scenarios out there. We tried to do something that you can take this first part of this presentation, take a look at it from a numbers standpoint, how it affects bills and things like that. So there's several variables that come into play that can be changed. The elasticity, one that we chose not to, that's an industry standard that we've kind of stayed with out there, but that's an option we have. You can look at changing your block sizes by class. The tier structure, the inclining blocks, determining where you want to make that rate, depending on whether it's a residential or irrigation or commercial account. Seasonal multiplier, if you want to do a seasonal rate only, we have that capability. And then just a block multiplier, you look at each tier. So we kind of go into each one of those. Model 1 that we'll take a look at on these scenarios is a tiered rate, which is charged year-round. So all 12 months for all classes except industrial. Model 2 is a flat seasonal rate, very similar to what we do with using the flat rate. This is for seasonal purposes only. Again, in all of these, we're taking out the industrial classes we just mentioned before. Model 3 is a flat seasonal rate, which is a residential and irrigation only. Doing that to show you how taking one component out between Model 2 and Model 3 will affect what the rate will do and what it will do to your conservation measures there. Model 4 is a flat rate plus a tiered seasonal rate, again looking at residential and irrigation. And in Model 1, this is that one, again tiered rate, year-round. There's no change in that base rate, which is that the base rate's the same as the demand that we talked before, which is the fixed cost. Tier 1 is no change for that low user. And Tier 2, we take 15% increase over the Tier 1 rate. Tier 3 would be a 20% increase over the Tier 2, and Tier 4 is a 20% over the Tier 3. The one thing to pick up on a tier that's a little bit different than a flat, on this here, is that it is a compounded rate. You'll notice you're taking an additional percentage of the rate before. So as you go along, the first 6,000 gallons may be at this rate, the next 10,000 gallons may be at this rate, and that increase would be on top of the other. So if I'm using 20,000 and you're using 6, that first 6,000 you're going to pay the same. The next tier is going to be a percent increase over what the previous was. That's a little bit different than when we just set a flat rate increase.
Okay, to make sure I understand. Tier, if you end up being a Tier 3 user, are you just paying 15% over the Tier 2 part, and then when you get to your Tier 3, you pay another 20% above that? Kind of like you showed in our original way we kind of do it now.
Correct. Every time
First.
you go to another tier, you're at a different rate, but it does not go back to gallon one. It's, each tier is
Right.
at that new
All
rate.
right, that's what I thought I wanted to
Understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
Impacts of this, we're trying to look at a 5% consumption reduction. And the average residential customer being at 6,000, we try to look at keeping that base rate the same for those people. And as mentioned before, this model here has probably the most volatility in it, in that where you're gonna see your conservation measures are in that irrigation type of account where 60% of your water is over that 100,000 users. That may be the person who gets that real high bill and says, I'm turning it off. So that's why it's so volatile. You can't control how everybody's gonna react to it, especially when you're one. Your Model 1 rates, which is again the tiered year-round, to explain kind of how this, what we were just talking about, the tier 1, that 2,000 to 6,000 is 276. That's our current rate, so there'll actually be no change in that piece right there. That takes care of 55% of our residential customers, so that it's not change at all.
I'm sorry, that price you're talking about there, is that per 1,000 gallon rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Then tier 2 is a 6,000 to 10,000, so that next 4,000, you have a 15% increase on the 276. So it's 317. And that's another 17%. By the time you get up to 10,000 gallons, you're now at 17% of your residential customers. So you're looking at over 12,000 customers at that point, residential customers being affected. Tier 3, it gets a little bit bigger. We go that 10,000 to 30,000. And again, you're looking at a 20%, in this scenario here, a 20% increase on your tier 2 rate of 317 to get you your 381. And yes,
Sorry, I'm looking at your tiers here.
that's fine.
And under the residential, when they get to 6,000, they're paying $3.17 per thousand
After 6,000.
after 6,000. But after 6,000 on the commercial, they're still paying $2.76 up to 30,000.
Yes, sir. That's an option we have on setting those blocks. Remember, you're looking at demand charges also. They're paying a much higher demand charge at $61.11 because they have that capability. They're a bigger customer, going to draw more. So they're not necessarily compared and said gallon per gallon, it's the same as a resident versus an irrigator or a commercial account.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of residences that would go up to $10,000 instead of like that lower rate that all the commercials still use. So my question to you is this our current rate structure?
Our current rate structure is flat. It's
Flat.
276, no
These are
matter
just
how many
hypotheticals.
gallons.
These are just hypotheticals.
Okay, I was making sure, because you mentioned
We
ago,
have
you
no
said
tiers.
then you just said a minute ago that's our current rate structure, or you were just talking the 276 is,
Right.
oh, okay, is what it is, okay.
Yeah,
I got you.
276 is where we are now, and so we're, in this particular scenario, we're looking at keeping that in that bottom tier with no rate adjustment at all. Okay? Commercial, and again, one of those variables that are out there that we can look at is changing that block size. The first tier being 2,000 to 30,000, at the 276, which is where we are right now. That would take care of 40% of your commercial accounts. Second tier is 30,000 to 60,000. Has a 15% increase. It's the same 15% that's on the 276. It would be the same 317. Tier 3 is a 60,000 to 100,000. So you get another 20% on top of your tier 2, 381. And then tier 4 is 100,000 plus. And that represents roughly about 25% of your customer businesses typically in more structured like that. We take a look at the irrigation, which is again that volatile area. That first tier being 2,000 to 20,000. Again, that can be adjusted if you feel that it ought to be the same for commercial. That's every time you make an adjustment, you're obviously going to affect how much conservation you can have and affect the rate that will come with it. This is just one particular scenario. There are 4 or 5 that you can kind of look at right. Tier 2.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
At some point, you're going to tell us which one of these models affect conservation the most.
Yes, sir. Here in just a second, we're going to flip the page and we're going to see how much conservation is affected by each one, whether you're looking at tiers or flat. We'll do that for each one of these models here.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Thanks.
Irrigation, again, these are just where we have them set at 2 to 20. Tier 2 is 20 to 60. And you notice that you have a lot less users on that lower end on the irrigation. You're not affecting nearly as many people on that lower end. When you get to tier 3, it's 60 to 100, and then tier 4 is your 100,000 plus customers, and you're still at over 52% of your customers out there.
If you got a owner has 2 meters, one irrigation, one commercial, one irrigation, one residential, you're not combining those to get his rate, you're doing it per meter, correct?
It's done per meter.
Okay.
It's an irrigation.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure that's what it was.
And where this came from, I mean, we sent our data off, we said 36 months for them to go out there. They did an analysis on it to come back and tell us, here's where each one of your customers fall, here's your usage, they're broken into every 2,000 gallons. So we can kind of see what type of effect, so we can have that when we adjust this with our elasticity and everything. So we happen to pick on the residential side, the 6,000, the 0 to 6,000, because again, that was our average customer that's out there. So that's the first one. We want to see what kind of effect that's going to have on them. You know, that next band, you know, 72% was 6 to 10,000 gallons. And so now you're covering 72, you can kind of see the impact that it has on those things. Your model 1 rate, this is the effect that you're looking to have on the bill. And again, your demand and base charge doesn't change whether we're looking at what our current rate is or what the model is proposing. That's that fixed cost that we're looking to always trying to recover. We came up with a TML survey that uses 10,000 for residential, 50,000 for commercial, and 200,000 for irrigation. So in all of these scenarios that we present, that's what we'll stay with. If it's a resident, we're going to look at a 10,000. So in this case here, we're at a 3/4 inch meter, so it's $13.34 for that demand charge. That next 8,000 gallons, 2,000 to 10, is going to be at $2.76. And that's where you get your 2208. Your model, same 1334 for demand, there's no change on that. It's going to be at $2.76 for that first 4,000, the 2 to 6. And then it's going to go up to $3.17 for the next 4,000 gallons. So therefore, your 10,000 gallon bill is going to be $23.72 for the volume rate, and the total bill of $37.06. Okay. Sample on the commercial, again, City of Lewisville, where we are right now, flat rate, no change. 6111 is our base charge on the 2-inch meter, and then they're going to pay 48 on the next 48,000 gallons, the $2.76 per thousand. And,
What did she say?
and then on the model side, again, staying with that same base rate of 6111 for a 2-inch meter. They're going to pay up to 50,000. They're going to pay from 2 to 30. So that first 28,000, they're going to pay the 276. Anything over 30 up to that 50, so the next 20,000, they're going to pay 317. Therefore, their volume metric is 140, 68. Their total bill of 201.79. For irrigation, assuming they use the same 2-inch meter, it's 6111 is the demand charge on both the current and the model that we're looking at here. For City of Lewisville, you've got 198,000 gallons at $2.76 per thousand. And that won't change as we go through these models. The current will always stay that way. The model, on the other hand, is going to come out and the way it's set up with its tier structure is the first 18,000 from 2 to 20 is going to be at that 276 rate. The next 40,000 gallons from 20 to 60 is going to be at 317. And then the next 40,000 after that from 60 to 100 is going to be at 381. And then anything over 100,000, in this case up to 200,000, is going to be at 457. So that would give them 785.88. So for a total of 846.
And to answer your question, Leroy, for the model, this would create a 5% reduction in consumption.
But maintain the same revenue generation.
A little bit more.
The way the rate model works, they're trying to hit a revenue requirement, which is essentially their budget. So no matter what the rate model is, it hits that number. designed to hit that number in every single one. Now, if the volume changes dramatically because it's a really dry summer, then yeah, you can see those fluctuations.
But it would do that on our current system.
That's right,
too.
it does that on the current.
So you're not changing the tier system, or changing the tier system to a tier system is not gonna, apples to apples, is not, gallon to gallon, is not gonna raise you more revenue.
By itself, this model produces the same amount of revenue as a
Right.
flat rate, as Model
Right.
2, as Model 3, as Model
Right.
4. Every one of the models we produce is designed to produce exactly the same amount of revenue.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But this
I mean,
this one's the 5% conservation.
The revenue comes from different customers.
that's their assumption it's gonna be 5%.
Right, that's.
I understand that, John.
I'm sorry. Nothing's written in stone. Okay. I can see the revenue's not much different. I mean, it's $10.
A question, if you go to one of these, tier models, you know, right now we have in there where we do a percentage increase each year. Would you still implement that? And would it just each figure be implemented by that same percentage, or how would that work?
Well, that'd be your option at the time when you're setting rates.
Well, but I mean, if we just, you know, right now we've got it where it's an automatic increase, isn't it? No, we did that, we're not on that anymore. We did that for a few years,
We
so.
bring it to you and make a recommendation and then, but we have been on average doing incremental
Right.
increases along the way.
And so if we continue to do that, to just keep up with the cost that's passed on to, we're doing it, the cost is passed on to by dollars. We would still do it, you could still do it on the tier model, and just be, each tier would be calculated.
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, typically you're going to tier, you're looking for conservation.
Right.
Model 2, this is a flat seasonal, a little bit easier to grasp on the concept because we already do a flat rate, so it's very similar to what we're doing. Your base and winter rates on a seasonal remain unchanged. And remember, our June through October is our summer rates, November to May is our winter rate. So summer increases for all categories. Major impacts, again, on this one, we're trying to look at achieving 5%. That's when we actually go look at the dollars and comparing bills, that'll be at 5%. You'll see the different levels of conservation or savings on consumption when you flip the pages. This one is, to achieve the 5%, we'd have to have a 60% rate increase on the volumetric side. Here's some fancy here. It still provides, being a seasonal rate, an opportunity to give a better chance to provide relief on those peak periods. Again, as Carol was alluding to, our contract with Stormwater Utilities has a budgetary impact should we ever go over there. We're looking at reducing those during this period of time. All users except for industrial will be impacted. And being a seasonal, we kind of have the option of phasing in a little bit at a time, so to get people used to the rate. On the Model 2, keep in mind this is not a tier structure. It almost kind of looks like it the way we presented on the slide here, but this is, you would pick a percentage increase that you would want, and that would become your summer. In this case, the winter rate would stay at 276, which is where we are right now. And then on the summer, you will, if you look at that far right-hand column, this is where you kind of see what it projects out your net consumption savings would be. In this particular case, you have a 15% rate increase for summer to take it up to 317. That would yield you back a 1.3% conservation measure. Again, that elasticity. The 2% versus 10%. It doesn't quite hold true here because you're only looking at a half of a year. So you're not looking at the whole year that the model is just tell you to get your 2% back on. And it also doesn't include an increase on the minimum side. It's just your volumetric rate. If you wanted to do a 20%, that would be 331. Again, that's 20% back of the 276. So you're not compounding it back on that number you see before 317. And so it goes on down. And you can do 30% would be 359, 40% would be 386. 50% for 414, and 60% for 442. Again, showing basically the 60 and 442 because that would be what it would take to get you up to your 5% that we're kind of looking at as an assumption. Okay. Again, to meet that 5% consumption reduction, we look at the 60% rate increase on the volume input side. To compare it with that 10,000 gallon residential, the base doesn't change, so the 1334 on both sides. Again, on the current, it's always going to be 276 per thousand. So probably what they're doing those. But on the model side, that 10,000, it's no longer a tier, so it's now that 8,000 gallons. It's going to come in at 442 rate. So it's going to be 35, maybe 60, 148.70. Your commercial, looking at the 2-inch meter, the demand stays the same, 6111, doesn't matter which, whether you're looking at the model or the current rate. So now you're looking at the 48,000 gallons above the 2. So 48,000 gallons at the 442, same rate for commercial, gives you 212.16 for a total of 270.27. And then on irrigation, you're looking at the 6111 per 2-inch meter, it stays the same on both sides. Current is 198,000 gallons at the 276 per thousand, and the model is going to have 198,000 at the 442.
Again, Brenda, nobody does a flat seasonal that we know.
Correct.
I was going to just ask you about those
Yeah.
figures anybody.
We showed it just for
It's,
reasons.
it's an
Yeah.
option.
Because it just, you mentioned earlier how people do get accustomed to a rate change or a charge or change. I mean, I remember when gas was 23 cents a gallon, but I'm accustomed to paying $3 to $4 a gallon. So you do get used to it, but that, you don't get used to it. You go there, to here, to here. you
Every
don't
summer,
know what
you're gonna be
Also making a
reminded
whole lot
of
more
that.
money than
Yeah.
they did back then too.
So, maybe I'm just not understanding this, but in general. So, our low-end users on all of these, none of these plans give our low-end users a break. Our folks are already conserving water who are under 6,000. None of these tiers are giving them any type of benefit.
On the seasonal flat rates?
None of the four.
None of the four, you're right. The way they're set up, that doesn't mean there has to. As we saw in the preliminary there, you can go with a lower rate.
And how many of these models actually hammer, well, I shouldn't say hammer, but increase the rate on the irrigation users?
The next,
How many of the four?
All four were including irrigation.
So, the city of Lewisville is the second largest irrigation user, and we pay for our own water. So aren't we just loading more costs onto the taxpayers, basically?
Not taxpayers. Taxpayers?
Well, I mean, we gotta pay that somehow, we're gonna pay that. So if we increase our cost of buying water,
All departments, all funds.
because we charge all departments and then,
yeah. So aren't we just shifting more of this cost onto the city? In which case, eventually it's coming out of my pocket as a taxpayer. And I'm not benefiting the lower consumers, the under 6,000. Well, I'm not giving them a reduction. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't have to.
these are options out there, you're right. The
Okay.
other scenario, you can lower the load.
But to
Well,
the
I'm-
extent- the extent you shift
Phone
costs to the city, for example, which then has to come out of the pocket of the general fund,
Mhm.
which is your example, that might cause us to reevaluate how we're using that water.
Which takes you back to the conservation side.
I just gotta believe, if we went to that, we'd be spending so much money on answering phone calls, we'd be
Well, I-
beating our purse.
Well, and Mayor, I'm not even really focused on this one, I'm talking about all four of them.
I understand.
Because all four of them.
All four of them will hit the irrigation that you use, regardless of who the customer is.
And Carol, see, we're just flavoring water wasters here in the city.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
Well, you saw that
We're
chart.
high volume users.
So even with the irrigation, you're at 157 gallons per gallon,
yes.
which is
Oh,
very
right.
low.
And now?
Yeah, no, I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around something that actually doesn't reward our low-end users and loads more cost
They
onto the
pay
city.
the rate.
These four models.
I think your low end run from 0 to 6,000, you're at your base rate, basically.
Yeah.
If you wanna subsidize that
Yeah, well, that's
0 to
what we're
6,
talking about.
push that on somewhere else, you can pull that.
If you drop that rate, one of the, I mean, you can run the model, and you put what assumptions you want. So if you
Sure.
want to drop that rate on the low-end user, and they actually see a benefit, even during the summertime, that's gonna have to come from somewhere, because you're back to revenue.
Agreed.
Right, so your higher rate, the number that we're showing here, we could actually probably look at higher on irrigation and commercial than what you're seeing, or even positive.
Then that brings into play what the mayor was concerned about.
Well, I guess, and the direction I was just kind of thinking was, okay, we're talking about doing a stormwater utility fee, right? So we got that, so we're adding that fee. But the mayor was talking about maybe some folks with fixed incomes or very small lot sizes or whatnot. They're already way below. So if you could balance, maybe not the full $4, but if there could be some sort of small reduction in their monthly rate here to slightly offset that $4 a month on the stormwater, I might be able to buy into something like that. But if we're loading it all back around the general fund, you know, because of our water use rates, then we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, maybe? I don't know. I'm watching the circle move there, so.
Get back to those first slides. What's the objective?
Yeah, so is the objective a 5% water usage rate? But, you know, we've got a lot of incentives in the city to use less water already, I mean, from the state and whatnot, don't we?
And I think a lot of people are already trying not to waste water just by hearing about how tough things are in water. I mean, I don't think anybody purposely just runs water down their street.
Oh, you haven't been to my street?
We haven't seen
But,
parks.
you know,
We
Yeah.
haven't seen parks.
yeah, not the parks.
Parks.
But what I'm saying is if they knew there was a problem, a lot of people says, hey, you know, your sprinklers are going off in the, you know, we turn it into code enforcement that the sprinklers and the mediums are going off or broken, and that gets addressed and fixed. It's not like it's all the time and that's normal, we're gonna just let it be.
But there are certain uses that you would be able to adjust to. Now, let me give you an example. You know, let's say the rates did change to the point where the general fund was seeing significant impact. We water in the wintertime our ryegrass in front of City Hall. I don't plant ryegrass in front of City Hall.
And did you know,
I can cut that off, we'll just go gray,
that's right,
whatever it is, you know, the dormant Bermuda, and I don't have to water that stuff. It's gonna save me some gallons.
and did you know
It's
that's
gonna save me
actually,
some money.
not only that, it's actually better for your lawn? Because our little association, homeowner association there, we used to do that. And the guy came in and said, hey, if y'all want to save yourself some money, he says, you're wasting money. It looks pretty, it looks nice, but it's not better for your lawn.
Medium landscaping treatments, instead of what we have now, you go with rock and go with cactus. We don't go with
Grew up in Arizona.
pretty plants.
You go look at Cop
There are
Avenue.
adjustments you can make.
We're going backwards now, yeah.
Going backwards in terms of what you can put now, but maybe forwards in terms of water conservation. It depends
Well,
on what's the objective.
my point being is,
That's-
I don't know if
that's
these
my
rates
view.
really address the general fund impact that we're talking about here, and then maybe it's a
I thought it
negligible,
was wasting money
nothing, maybe
doing all that
but
irrigation and creek myrtles and stuff.
do you see where I'm coming? So I, for a 5% reduction, and we're already one of the lowest users
Yeah.
in the Metroplex.
And all we're really trying to do here is show you how many variables can come into play. Okay.
And then I just
This
threw
is,
more
we're
in.
not even saying this is our recommendation to go do this. You may want to do the other. I think, this presentation started with, you may not want to change anything. There's nothing wrong with the structure you have right now. But if you want to look at doing other things, what are those objectives that you want to identify? And you're right, there is a cause and effect to each one of these that you take. I mean, if we look at Model 3 here, I mean, it's the same thing, we just left that Model 2 on some full commercial out. The only reason why we're showing that is, when you remove those gallons, it's gonna have an effect.
Right.
So you're not gonna see the same conservation, even though you're at the same rate. Real quick on this, you got your residential irrigation only, we're taking the commercial out of what we just looked at. Your commercial and industrial will remain year-round at that same base, and in this case, 276, obviously. Your base and winter rates are unchanged. The impact that you're looking at here, you can achieve that close to 5% at 4.8, but you're gonna have to double your rate. You're gonna put 100% on those that are affected, because now you're down to only 2 classes. Again, it's only for half the time during the summer months. For purposes of this illustration here, didn't really think that doubling our water rate in the summer was going to be a modified. It was done off the 5% rule for a good deal, and we're going to do it probably at 2.4 4%. We'll look at that same scale we just looked at when we flipped the page. Again, this is a summer only, so this does give you that possible budgetary impact of reducing that consumption around peak times when we may be pushing up against the limit on that 90 gallons that we buy. That's what 90. Again, that same scale that we looked at before on this one here. This is not a compounded rate. This is just a summer only. And due to the fact that you can now pull commercial out of this, you're looking at only getting a 0.7 if you go up 15%. 20% would give you a 1%, half of a year. That's what we're looking at. So, again, if you wanted to try and get to that magical 5% that's out there, you would have to double your rate to 552. So almost gets you close to where you are, 276 plus our 330 for sewer that we were talking about. I think the mayor was bringing up before that at some point, if it's cheaper to pay your sewer rate on top of it, then you obviously make changes there. Your Model 3 rates, again, only looking at the 2.4%, which is a 50% rate increase. This is that flat rate scheme in the summer. We don't know when they're doing it. It's just a scenario that's out there. Our current doesn't change on the residential. That 10,000 gallons stays the same. The 13, 30, 14 remains. So your 8,000 gallons will be at 414 under the model. So that's going to give you that $33.12. And then the same on your irrigation is at 200,000. 2-inch meters is 6111 in both cases. 276 per thousand on the 198,000 for your current, and then the model, the 198,000 would be at that 414 rate. And model number 4, this is another one just to kind of show here's another option that's out there. This is taking your flat rate through the winter months, and when you get to the summer, implementing a tiered structure. Again, that tier produces that compounding effect on the rates if you're calculating them down. Here we're excluding the commercial. Again, residential irrigation only, the base and winter rates remain unchanged for everybody. The impact of the one that we're going to show here only achieves a 1% consumption reduction. And the average residential customer remains unaffected. That's that 55% of your residents being at 6,000 or less. By not changing their rates, they're not affected by that. This allows, again, that incremental change because you're introducing a tier structure only in the summer months. So it limits the amount of time you can adjust your rates and kind of measure the effect of each one of the criteria that you're trying to measure on it. So in this case, your Model 4 is going to come out with your residential. Again, winter rates are going to be 276 for all customers. The summer tiers, at 2,000 to 6,000, and again, we set those based on our customer base. No increase from there, so it stays at 276. The next 4 is a 5% increase. Again, we're only trying to achieve a 1% reduction at this point, so that's why these numbers are going to be down some. That's 290. Your next tier of 10 to 30 will be a 15% increase on top of that 290 to get you to 333. And your tier 4 would be another 15% on top of that, which is your users over 30,000. Only 4% of our residential customers are there. And then the only other one we're looking at in this scenario is the irrigation. Again, 276 no change. All of the increments are remaining the same, 0, 5%, 15, and 15. So therefore those rates stay the same. It's just a irrigation. Again, all of these scenarios can be adjusted to fit whatever objective you're trying to get. Okay.
Is there no net consumption on rate Model 4?
All right.
Net
No.
consumption reduction?
Oh, yeah, it's just 1%. Yeah,
1%?
1% is all we're on that. And it's again just kind of show you the effect of pulling one of those out. Again, if you do a bill comparison, we're looking at the winters at 276. So all that we're presenting here is what's happening during those summer months with the tiers, and residential. The current is just the 276 for the 8,000 gallons. The model has 276 for those gallons up to 6,000, and then 290 for those above it. So they'll get you your 264. Again, commercial is not affected by this scenario. The we're doing here, so we're just kind of showing you that it doesn't, stays 276 on both the model and on the current, so we're going to change it all a bit. And then the sample irrigation, again, your tier structure, we're at 198,000 gallons at 276 for our current model, which remains the same throughout each one of these. And then finally on the model there, your consumption is that first 18,000 to 20 is going to be 276, 20 to 60, the next 40 is at 290, 60 to 100 is at 333, and everything over 100. In our case here, up to 200,000 is at 383. That yields us to 681.88 for a total bill of 742.99.
What's our long-term water usage? So that 147 we have.
157.
157. What's it been over time? Have we been trending up, trending down? How quickly
We've
have we
actually
been?
come down.
Yeah.
The highest we've had in recent years has been 167. And we had a 170 a while back, but ours has actually steadily come down, even though our population has increased.
Is that, can we determine if that reduction is coming predominantly from one category or another, residential versus commercial versus irrigation? Can we determine that?
I don't know that offhand, but I can.
I'd be interested.
No, we've looked at it like that.
I would guess that it's going to be more in line with irrigation, because, east of 35, there's very few swimming pools and very few irrigation systems. When the growth started, on the west side of 35, you're going to see more of that type of usage. So I would guess a lot of it's from irrigation.
I have no objection at all to putting in place a program that creates zero-scaping options for water reduction. Or what I really concerned, Model 4 kind of shows it pretty well. We give a little tick up on residential, and then we give a pretty big tick up on the city and other irrigation users. And my net is I'm paying a lot more for 1% reduction because I've loaded it on that particular sections. Now, could I load it differently? Possibly. We can build a model any way you want. But if I'm going for 1%, might I be able to get that through an education program or through some ordinances and zoning changes, through zero-scaping, or whatever we pick? I don't know. But if the objective is water reduction, maybe we need to look at some other options as well. I don't know if the financial model necessarily wins me over at the moment.
About the mandatory water restrictions that other cities are doing to cut rates during the summer months. Like water only on whatever the day of the week.
If they're aggressive enough, they will reduce demand.
But you have to
Oddly
get
enough,
code
when you
for it.
first,
Oddly enough,
when
it
you
will-
first
it could
implement
increase.
when you
Yeah.
first
What's
implement
that?
it, it increases demand.
Well, because I know
But
Irving.
once you start getting hardcore about enforcement, then it decreases.
Yeah, well, that's like, it has to be hand in hand. So I know in Irving, they send out a little chart, the water bill, and my friends have it on their, you go in there, it's posted right there, no water only on this day and this day, so. It's because, they do have code enforcement, and code enforcement comes around and they do warn you once or twice, but then after that, they start getting tickets, so.
Well, I think based on what stage that we're in, we have that here in the city, usually it's voluntary. Maybe we need to do a little bit of education.
I mean, if that's what our goal is to,
Yeah, we send that information out, but again, I think to really make an impact, you have to go after
Yeah, you have to
People
go,
pretty
you have to go
hard.
to enforcement.
and a lot of people are doing voluntary, don't get me wrong. I mean, I definitely charge to water on trash days, and I make sure it doesn't get onto the sidewalk, I want to keep it in there. My grass is pretty brown, but the thing is, I do have trees that I want to keep watered and stuff, and because I didn't water as much, my trees in the front yard died, and now I'm replacing trees. Well, there's something about over-conservation type things, but like Gilmore said, zero-scape. I just don't want to put rocks and cactus all over my front yard,
Keep the kids off your lawn.
They already are. They already stay off my lawn.
So,
Well,
you said that we went down, what time frame would you say we went from 167 to 157?
In the next 5 years.
Last 5 years. And did that hurt us on the revenue side?
I don't think it did that much because we didn't have to increase. We haven't increased our take from Dallas since 2000, so we haven't spent more money, but we've come down and, you know, our revenue's been,
I
Okay,
mean, it's less revenue, but that 167 or 157 for that matter represents so much irrigation. And usually peak irrigation during the summer that is in excess of the demand that we build into the model,
right.
that it produces more revenue than we modeled every year.
So, if I remember at the beginning, we showed we're 157, and the Texas Coalition, whatever it was recommending 140. That's a 10% drop for us. 157 is right at a 10% drop, which, if you were to get to that level, would that hurt your revenue stream? I mean, not hurt, I mean, put us in a fix as far as, because I know we use the revenues to pay for
We'd be cranking our water.
infrastructure.
If you can, the answer's kind of hard because if you don't, you say no change in our rate model, then gradually our normal year would be going down. If the consumptions gradually started going down, we would be basing the rate model on a different level of consumption. So each year when you set the rates, you would be setting them for whatever you expected to see in that normal year the following year. So theoretically, it wouldn't hurt your revenue because you'd be adjusting to that gradual reduction. And the rates probably would go creep up a little bit as a consequence of it.
Next, the model's always gonna generate what you need to
Whatever
cover
you
your
need.
budget. That's
Yeah, just keep that in mind, no matter what happens, the model's gonna generate the revenue that you need.
Well, what you're calling a normal year, aren't droughts and that sort of thing more prevalent now? But I mean,
Yeah, the normal year is probably drier lately than it has been in other years, the last 4 or 5 years in particular.
But our model picks up on that.
Well, it's a running period.
Running average.
Yeah, so it picks it up in arrears.
If we're looking at it, because if you start this off with, there's no financial, your first deal, there's no financial gain to doing this. Because as we've said several times, the revenue is the same in each model.
Yeah, but
Have you looked-
the revenue requirement's the same now.
Right.
Let me qualify that. Right now, because we set a revenue requirement on a normal year, when it's hot and there's a lot of irrigation, that model produces buku revenue.
Or Castle Hill.
Or Castle Hill produces a lot more revenue beyond the revenue requirement, which we use then to finance capital projects.
On average.
Acquisition.
But on average.
So when you drive some of that extra demand down, then you won't have as much of that extra revenue.
Which we've had
Summertime.
extra. I guess have we thought about doing, because I know on your water bill, you get usage. It shows last year, last month, I think it just shows that now. I don't think it shows every month. It used to show.
It's 13 months.
Does it still show 13 months usage on there? I thought it changed it to went last year, this month, last month, we'll say last June. Let's say you get your bill for June. It would show last June, May, and then this June. But maybe it shows the whole 13 months. I thought it just changed. But
Yeah,
whatever.
so it might be a different utility. I think we're still showing all 13.
Okay, we're still showing all 13. If you did, have you thought about, or has anybody looked at doing a model where you're rewarded or not rewarded, I don't want to say it different, not rewarded by saving consumption? You look at your prior month, last year, because you can't base August on January. But from January to January, if you use less water, your rate would be X. If you use more water, your rate is Y. And that, to me, is a personal incentive to consume water. If I don't want to do it, I'm going to pay Y. If I want to consume water, I'm going to pay X. I don't know if that would work or not. But we have that data, it's on the bill. So it's easy to do, and you could, I would think you'd put it in your system, it'd be easy to administer. Because you put it in your system, it shows you right there. If you went up, you're getting charged a surcharge. You went down, you're getting rewarded up.
And that works for a period of time till you reach whatever your bottom is, and
Right.
the next year, you're probably going back up, and you're gonna pay a higher rate.
Right.
In essence, that's what the tiered rate structure is designed to do.
Right.
It's a simplified version of what you just described.
Mine sounds like it's pretty simple. It goes up, you pay for it, goes in, and you just vote. And you do it on a percentage on
You might have
whatever.
to calculate a percentage on every single customer.
No.
That's what computers are for.
That makes you,
My conception's not the same as yours, so my
It calculates that deal on my bill right there for every single customer. The usage, it gives me 13 months of usage for every single customer.
But you're varying the rates based on the usage, and that's what
you
he's
vary
talking
your
about.
rates based on the
Computer did
usage.
that just like it does that
My
little
usage
chart.
last year compared to my usage.
See, there's
this
difference
year.
in you do that system.
It's
All
cool.
right,
Clifford, get after it.
It's cool,
All right,
but
no problem.
I don't know what effect's gonna be on your revenue stream, but the fact is you can't calculate that. All it is the calculation based on percentage of usage.
Then you can sell
You
that
can
software
calculate
to all
it.
the.
The trick is applying
Yeah.
a rate structure to it.
Exactly.
Budget.
Find out
That's
where
the
you need
hard
to set
budget.
that rate, and,
Right.
because you don't know who's gonna come up, who's gonna go down.
What the percentages are gonna be, and they're all gonna be
Yeah.
different for every
All
customer.
different.
And if we come up short on that, don't look your guy down.
Next slide. Let's wrap this up real quick.
Yeah,
Uh,
well,
Well, let me
Go ahead.
roll through the rest of this. Again, the thing to keep in mind throughout any discussion on this is what are we trying to accomplish? There's two possibilities. There's conservation and then there's the avoidance of any of those demand charges and extra water financial impacts that we wind up with when the water demand does increase. Basically, as Brenda indicated before, incremental approaches tend to be more successful. They can avoid or minimize unintended impacts or consequences. Unfortunately, an incremental approach isn't going to achieve the same degree of demand response if your objective is some really strong conservation messages to be sent. An incremental approach won't do that because people do tend to adjust over time. They will just, like we said earlier, they'll pay more for the gas because they just kind of got used to it, and it happens so slowly. On the positive side, though, it's easier for the customer to adjust. You're not going to hear as much complaining about it, and obviously with an incremental approach, you can stretch the rate changes that you have over a period of years. So there's lots of different strategies here as far as what you could start with and what you wind up with. One of these starts with the idea that maybe you begin with seasonal tiered rates. If you want to go that route, go with seasonal tiered rates for the irrigation class only. Now, that's not going to come up with your 5% target. You're not going to have a 5% reduction just by attacking the irrigation class only. You could try to get 5% out of the irrigation class only, but then those rates are going to really start jumping up, and you'll probably start hearing it very loudly. You could have an incremental target where you increase it over time, 1% target for each year, and get to that 5% over a period of years. Again, evaluating and adjusting each year, and then eventually migrate to year-round irrigation only tiered rates. Then, maybe move on to adding seasonal tiered rates for all customer classes, not just the irrigation class. Similarly, you'll have to adjust the total system demand target downward. You can use similar summer demand only targets, and then again, similar incremental implementation strategies. Following that, perhaps you could add year-round tiered rates for all classes. Not just seasonal tiered rates, but year-round tiered rates. However you proceed, I think what our recommendation is you need to move fairly cautiously. We've had pretty good success with that in the past. I can tell you that the only recall election I'm familiar with in Lewisville occurred over water, actually sewer rates is what it boiled down to, but it was utility rates. And it resulted from, number one, failing to adapt to the cost structure of the city over time. They basically kept the rates the same for many, many years and didn't adjust them. then all of a sudden, they had to make an adjustment, and it was a 20% adjustment, and next thing you know, there was a recall election. That's one thing to avoid. That's gonna result in going backwards, because there'll be a effort to roll back whatever you put in place, and maybe roll it back further than where you started from. So I think that's kind of a political issue for you, but again, practically speaking, it's a good thing to probably move incrementally when it comes to water and sewer rates. The other thing it allows us to do is to adapt to any of those changes and unforeseen circumstances that might happen. If we try to do too much too soon and there is an unforeseen circumstance, it could be pretty dramatic. If you do it a little more cautiously and slowly, then whatever unforeseen circumstances happen are much more minor. So I think that basically is it. We've got some recommendations here that if you want to start trying to deal with the irrigation issues, you might start with seasonal tiered rates for irrigation residential only, maybe throw in commercial. See what you can do to maybe start with a 1% reduction, periodically adjust that over 5 years and see how you do.
Isn't that the one where the rates are going sky high in the summer? And they're cheap, and you get used to for
seasonal
6
tiered rates,
months?
yeah, seasonal tiered rates does that. The alternative would be to go to the year-round tiered rates.
To me, there's phones are gonna light up at City Hall in July and August and September, boy, you're
For a 1%
all
reduction.
of these
Water
involve
rates.
this last thing. No matter what you do, you have to accompany it with really intensive public education on what you're doing, why you're doing it, what are gonna be the impacts, and what the customer can do to mitigate those impacts. Without that, I wouldn't do any of this stuff, because I think the rate changes can be significant enough. But again, if you only do it 1% at a time, it won't be as bad as you think.
And education and
I'm
stuff.
wondering if you couldn't get that 1% just by doing a full court press on xeriscaping and water reduction education. I don't know. I mean, it's money being spent there too.
You could certainly try it. I mean, we've got a baseline set of data here, the data on the water system.
No, it's good stuff.
Pretty voluminous, so.
Yeah.
We're gonna get rid of all like water fountains and stuff that we have now to conserve.
Yeah, let's spend money tearing stuff out.
On the city side. My opinion, if you're
Change
gonna
all the
allow people to do a bunch of stuff like that, you probably ought to start doing some of it
Exactly.
yourself.
It's like that park across from City Hall, the plaza.
Yeah, I mean, like the green grass on the city hall in the winter
I
time.
was talking about that one.
I know, water fountain.
Takes them all.
We're taking bids on it right now. For repair. So that's the story there. I don't know if you guys have any other questions. It's very complicated, I understand, and so you're probably totally overwhelmed at this point, but.
Well, I'd like to see us move forward on something that would maybe approach a 1% reduction. I'm just not sure if this is the end to do it.
I got a question going back to where we started, that there was a 140 number and then a 157.
157 is where we're at right now.
Okay, is that more than the state guidelines said,
It's
or is
more
that
than-
less?
It's more than the target they want you to have.
So we're already exceeding the target.
By a lot.
Yes.
So why are we doing anything?
No.
No, we're wrong side of the
You're
target.
exceeding
We're
it
on
the
the
bad
wrong
way.
side.
Yeah.
You're
But
So
most of the
we're-
cities around us are way beyond even our target, where we are.
So the goal is to save 140 gallons per person?
No.
To limit to
The
140
current-
versus
the
170.
The goal is 17 gallons.
I don't know what all these numbers
Let me
mean.
try to explain. The current gallons per capita per day is 157. Average Joe in Lewisville uses 157 gallons per day, correct? That's the number.
That is correct.
All right. Yeah, so per person. The state wants municipalities to not exceed more than 140 gallons per person per day. And so to get there, we have to reduce our consumption by 17 gallons per person per day.
And then when we get there, what's the state gonna do?
Ratchet it down.
Ratchet
Ratchet
it
down
down
to
130.
In other words, just taking a bath
Who
on
knows?
Saturdays will get you.
Who knows?
I'm already doing that, so that's all
Yeah,
right.
we know.
There's no prize.
That's a joke, TJ. I'm
Frankly,
So, yeah, I
Steve and I
gave
have
it
been
to you. I
shocked
gave it to you, bud.
that the state hasn't done it yet.
What's that?
Set a mandated target of some kind with penalties.
And then exempt
swift
themselves.
penalties. Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure. It goes without saying.
I think there'd be a huge, if they start mandating stuff like that.
I know there's
They
states.
do
that
it all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
There's states,
This
Colorado,
is Texas, yeah,
Wyoming,
Colorado.
places like that.
And I'm sure they'll fund it too.
Arizona.
Yeah, they'll find
They've got some stiff rules in place in some of those locations, so. Texas is a strange place. I was reading Lone Star the other day, and they talk a lot about water.
You know, on our usage, it's kind of like this, right? Our annual usage is a graph about like that, right?
The summer being higher.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the heat being in the summer. So when we're saving 1%, 2%, 5%, whatever we're gonna save, are we saving 1% along? In other words, is the line 1% all along less, or are we saving the most up on the top of the
Depends.
peak?
Depends on how you want to do it.
What seems to me that you'd want to, I don't know, if you're gonna save, try to keep yourself from ending up higher cost, that you want to try to curve that peak or flatten
That's
that
why you
peak.
have
So it's
seasonal.
Yeah.
tier rate.
So you-
Right.
so
I
you-
don't like it.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't like it,
Yeah, because you're loading all that cost into that smaller period of months as opposed to spreading it out over the whole year.
And that's where most of the usage is.
Right, but I guess what you have to look at is how close, because we're at a level with DW right now. And you can't go under that, so as long as we stay there, we're there. I guess our main concern is that we don't go above that, correct?
Correct.
So that would be cutting that peak off.
Correct.
You wouldn't need to worry about the other portions of it.
Yeah, I need to see those numbers and see how close we were and what our trend line
It's so
was.
important to me.
Yeah.
We'll go over it.
Yeah, and the whole deal to build out, you're gonna,
You got it.
you're gonna buy.
Eventually, you're gonna buy them all.
Buy.
All
Just
that's in
putting it
your
off as
contract?
long
You're
as
just
you
putting
can.
it off.
All that's in your contract?
Because remember that first chart that Carol did?
Right.
Before?
Because
I
when
thought
we
it
built
was-
out
We
at
use
73.
every bit of that treated water at the end with our normal demand.
Because we're paying for it anyway.
But I thought our contract went higher than that.
It goes to 33, but every time you bump up, it's 202,000. So this is conservation and working your peak to keep from going up or extending that point where you have to go up.
It won't let you go down.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah. So it's really just trying to stay within
Ultimately,
that
when you
bracket
look
as
at
long
the
as you
total
can.
demand
Yeah.
of the city out in the year 2050,
Oh, it's.
you'll be using every bit of that treated water no matter what.
Yeah, it's,
I will say, I think you'll get a lot of flack from your citizens if you start taking away the landscaping stuff. If you look at all the cities around us and where people, when they leave us and where they're moving to, they're moving to cities that have landscaping. And putting landscapings in their medians. Flower Mound, Highland Village. Now, I will say, the one city that I think's done a great job on theirs, and it's just as pretty as anybody's, I think, is Coppell. And they do have a lot of rock and cactus, but it's done,
Very nice.
I mean, it's beautiful. It just
Well,
looks really pretty.
Go to Scottsdale, Arizona.
Well, theirs is kind of modeled like that, I
You
think.
got nothing there.
Do we have what Coppell's been?
But it's
Yeah,
very-
and that's what-
It looks.
That was my next thing, I was gonna look at that and then look and see what does their, because I guarantee theirs is so manicured, it's got, they'll have yellow rock here, and then a red rock, and then a blue rock, and I mean, it's really
Coppell
nice.
is
but
third
they-
from the top.
How much is it?
215.
What now?
So they're
Really?
using a lot of
Consumption.
water.
Coppell is
215.
third from the top.
Where
on
they're
our
using so
survey.
much water?
Their parks are very nice and
Irrigation,
green.
They probably moved the rocks with a water hose.
I mean, it's
Right,
really
residential.
cactus.
They have a small population based
I
on
was-
all the other stuff.
I was looking forward to city consumption.
I understand.
Yeah, the medians and.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
There's some pretty nice parks.
Yeah, a lot of pools. a lot of-
Texas is way behind in recognizing that they are in an arid environment. And it's partly because where I was going before, is partly because Texas is so big that it has so many different climatic zones. We're here in the kind of the central area, we think it's pretty reasonable compared to West Texas, but it's not as wet as it is in East Texas. And so sooner or later, Texas is gonna have to understand that it is a state that didn't have any natural lakes. And
Or
something's gonna have to be done.
One,
Well, yeah.
And it's an easy.
That's Louisiana Lake, I mean.
it's close.
All right, well, that's, unless somebody has any other questions.
That's good stuff, thank you.
I think I got one more topic.
It is.